Before we get started, if anybody else has anything that they want to share, they're more than welcome to chime in or take the mic for 60 seconds, make a quick intro. Other than that, please feel free and use this time to connect, use this time to get to know other people. And then on Hemp Hallway, log into Hemp Hallway, and I'll share it here in just a minute, the link. Create yourself a profile so that you guys can actually connect and communicate back and forth. It's an easy way to create a profile, find content. And then also, more than half of our viewers on our YouTube channel and socials are not subscribed. And so I encourage you guys to support us by please going out and sharing and liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. We broadcast all of our live interviews through YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and LinkedIn, and then also record and transcribe these and share them back to Hemp Hallway and some of them onto our YouTube channel. And so I think there's like 200 hours of recorded interviews. For those of you that are looking for knowledge or a place to get started, it's definitely a great resource. So real quick, I'll turn the mic over if anybody has anything they want to say or make a quick intro. I'll give you 60 seconds and then we'll turn it back over to Dr. Mahdi. Michael, I see your mic is off. Hi, you want to say hello?
Hi guys, nice to meet you. I just joined. Actually, I met Mandy at the NIHC conference in DC, which was amazing. And I am with a new manufacturing company that is building hempcrete pallets and other building products. So I'm looking for fiber and trying to understand the lay of the land for the carbon market, how carbon credits are generated, monetized, distributed, and all of that. So pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you very much. Be sure that you share your chat or your contact info in the chat, and then feel free, like I said, to reach out and really use this opportunity to connect with each other. Okay, Dr. Mahdi, I'll turn it over to you and let you. Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry to keep stumbling over my own words. Keep yourselves on mute just out of respect for when we're in conversation. When you do have the mic or have a question, make sure you ask the question. Stay on topic, try to stay away from sales pitches, right, as about what we're necessarily outselling, but very much an education and opportunity to build relationships. And then for those of you that haven't used Zoom very much, up in the upper right-hand corner, you can change the view to speaker. And then if you leave it in the, with all the little tiles, you can actually grab a hold of a tile and move them around so that you can have speakers or different people at different spots if you're communicating with them. So just kind of giving you a heads up about that piece. Other than that, Mahdi?
All right.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mandy, for this opportunity to be part of this platform and have this conversation with my colleagues about really critical issue of our time, if we think about it, in agriculture. A little bit background about myself. I work in academia for almost 3 decades, and the last 20 plus years, I worked as a professor at Iowa State University. And most of my work focused during these 20 years look into the soil carbon dynamics, so look at the issues that's related to agriculture management practices and how they influence carbon gain or carbon loss and greenhouse gas emission. So I did a lot of research integrating different management practices, from tillage practices to crop rotation to nitrogen management, and how these different practices interface in a row cropping system. I admitted I never work with hemp, but it's very exciting crop to be included in the mix within agriculture system. So I did this research, and my research focus really, I'm a soil scientist, to integrate the theoretical part with the practical part and develop a set of indicators or set of information that will be applicable to the farmers. So part of my work as faculty at Iowa State University is between research, graduate students, and work with the farmers. So I try to tailor my research to answer some of the really emerging issues in the agriculture communities and how we can improve these practices, and basically to focus on the three principles in my research. One, to look at the productivity and the sustainability of productivity and how we do a better job by improving the productivity with less input. Two, look at the economic viability of these agriculture practices. And third, to link it to really environmental outcomes. And that's really the essence, if you will, of sustainability. You need to have that balance between these components and we did that in our research. I served in many different national and international committees to develop some standards, from the fuel standards and soil quality. That was actually in Switzerland by Lorenz Institute, developed that. Lately, the last 3 years, I served on the National Academy of Science, a study that really is for net zero emission. And there is a chapter on terrestrial carbon sequestration. I was one of the co-authors on that study. And now it's becoming platform actually for the legislation and policy in the Senate Agriculture Committee to look into the climate smart agricultural practices and how we accelerate the adoption of these different practices, namely to look into the management. So that's in the nutshell, a quick overview about my background and my experience in this area of research. And I'm delighted to be with you, to listen to your questions and engage in a conversation with you and learn from you at the same time in this dialogue.
Okay, so one question that comes up quite a bit is the actual certification of the carbon. Can you speak a little bit to what that looks like in other agricultural practices and how it's related potentially in the hemp industry, and where do we go to find those certified, who certifies those credits?
Right. Let me just go a little background about the whole carbon marking credit. When we look at the carbon credit, it's a not new concept. It was really developed way back in the 90s. If you remember, some of you, it's the Chicago Exchange, climate exchange. And that experience was not well thought of, and it didn't really do good, and it didn't develop a good platform to look into the credit. I think the challenges with the climate change, and that's part of the studies nationally and internationally, how we could incorporate agriculture as a player into the arena of climate change solution. There is many different solutions. Agriculture can play a vital role into this issue. And that's where the carbon credit become really very significant. And there is a lot of movement on the industry part. You look Indigo and others. There is NORI, there is ecosystem consortium management currently. So there is a lot of effort on the private sector to establish carbon credit. And what is carbon credit? Basically, it's amount of carbon per unit of land. Let's say a ton of carbon per acre. So that's in exchange to minimize or to reduce the emission by the industry, buy into these credit. However, there's a lot of caveat, there's a lot of standards, and the market is still really in the developing stages. And one of the issue about certification and verification of these credit, there is two issues. There is a buyer and the seller for these carbon credits. The buyer will be the industry to mitigate or to offset some of their emission by buying certain number of credits that coincide with their portfolio of greenhouse gas emission. The seller will be the farmers, and that will be whether in the forest management, whether row crops, range management, and when we look at hemp is part of the process of rethinking agriculture system. So between the two, the buyer and seller, it has to be some certification process. And that's a third party to certified what they call monitoring, reporting, and verification. So this process has to be by qualified third party to certify these carbon credits are quality credits and they are tradable. So within that context, you have to have a mature industry, what I mean mature industry in the carbon credit to verify and certify these credits. So when they sell these credits, that the buyer, they knew they got the quality credit, what they paid for. And that is still really fluid in the market. The carbon credit is still, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of need to develop this fully developed market. So there is a lot of opportunities like the hemp industry and other industries that they can contribute to that. And still there's a lot of opportunities available. So when we look, there's not much really on the national standard. That's what it's lacking. We need a national standard for certifying these credits. And that's so everybody could compare apples with apples in selling and buying these carbon credits.
On the agriculture side, can you speak to how it's measured and how it's tracked within soil or regenerative agriculture practices, differences?
Yeah. When we look at the carbon sequestration, that's really the buzzword, it's within agriculture. It's a simple process which is based on the carbon dioxide removal from the air through the photosynthesis process. So like hemp, like any other crops, when we have these different cropping system and different what we call regenerative agricultural practices, and that include many different practices like no-till, rangeland, minimum disturbance, cover crop, and crop rotation. So when you look into the efficiency of these regenerative agricultural practices, you need to rethink the whole agriculture system currently in a place. Most of the agricultural practices for the last, I would say, since 1900, focus on a monocropping system, which is one single crop, produced on the same piece of land year after year after year. Then starts a movement to incorporate other cropping systems in the mix. For example, they start rotating corn and soybean and meadows, alfalfa, for example. Or you look at the wheat, millet in the western states and some other crops and corn in the mix. So the key issue for regenerative agriculture to be effective in carbon sequestration, it's the diversity of the crops grown on any farm. So one year you grow corn, the other year you grow soybean, wheat, millet, and then you incorporate other crops. So I see the opportunity for hemp, it's as another crop incorporated into that crop rotation. And the advantage of having hemp into the rotation, couple things. One, it's the buildup of carbon in the soil system, because carbon sequestration, first and foremost, it's driven by the root system in the soil. And when you have active root system that allocate most of these carbon compounds into the soil system, the other value added within the perennials or other fiber crops like hemp is basically the storage of carbon in the biomass above ground. These biomass will be utilized in a different products by different industry, whether the fabric industry or furniture industry, and you name the application, there's endless application. That's when you lock the carbon permanently, just like when you're building a house and all these logs and all these 2x4s built, that's carbon stored permanently into the structure, unless exposed to fire or any other things. So that's the opportunity, the added value to the farm and the economy along with it, when you look into a third crop into the crop rotation. And that is going to add to the value of building what we call the sustainability of soil system, or the resiliency of the soil system. And nowadays we brand it as a soil health. It used to be called soil quality, which is really, it's not a new concept. We just rebranding the new concept of soil quality into the soil health with significant emphasis on the biology of the soil system. And that goes to the crop rotation. When you have another crop like hemp within their own cropping system, you increase that diversity and of root system, and that is going to enhance the biodiversity in the soil system. We do a lot of studies looking into if you have monocropping system, you grow corn after year, or you rotate corn, for example, corn after soybean, after alfalfa, you see significant increase in the microbial biomass. That increase is the engine to drive the improvement of soil health and improve all other qualities, physical, biological, and chemical qualities within the soil system. And that's the beauty of having that crop rotation, extended crop rotation into the cropping system. So that's how we need to rethink our agriculture system and get away from the old, paradigm, which is focused on a monocropping system and driven by high input, which is whether synthetic fertilizer or other high input, and basically increase the nutrient cycling when you increase that crop rotation into the soil system.
I'm on mute, or was on mute. Okay, so awesome. Here's a great question Tim just asked. Does carbon sequestration rate change depending on the types of practices, GMO, pesticides, herbicides, technology versus polyculture crops with organic pesticides?
That's really a good and critical question, and there is a lot of information to unpack within that question. You have a technology, GMO, you have the input of chemicals, and you have the crop rotation. So you have three buckets of information in this question. Let's take first, if we look at the rotation, and we kind of touched on it briefly, rotation is one of really fundamental practices in enhancing carbon sequestration. And that's, by definition, carbon sequestration is the capture of the CO2 from the air through the plants by photosynthesis, the process converting that CO2, a reaction with the water, into sugar and carbohydrate, and is stored into the fibers, into the plant biomass, and into the roots, and then allocated down into the soil system. So when you have that diversity in the cropping system, different crops growing, different forbs and perennials and all this, that is going to enhance the capture of carbon dioxide, will enhance the carbon allocation and carbon storage. The other question, which is related to the practices, how we stabilize these gain in carbon. The significant issue within rural cropping system and in the Midwest over the last 150 years, we lost about almost 50% of the organic matter, of the original organic matter of the soil because of the intensity of the tillage and the monocropping system. One study I just released in the Soil Science Society of America from long-term study I conducted for the last 20 years, look at the crop rotation and intensity of tillage. The more intense the tillage, we lost more carbon with these conventional tillage, whether chisel plow, deep rib, or Marlboro plow. When we compare it to other tillage systems, which is no-till, strip tillage, these systems increase the carbon significantly by almost 1/3 of a ton per acre. So that's the practices. You need stability. You need to minimize the soil disturbance to capitalize on these carbon storage by these different cropping systems. When we look at the GMO, look at these are really more kind of physiological and productivity questions, and has no effect on the really carbon storage negatively or positively. Most of the hybrids in corn and soybean, these are highly efficient in biomass production, because when you increase the biomass production, you increase the carbon removal from the CO2 because you have more biomass. Some of you, I'm sure, familiar with the new hybrids in corn, you look at 5-6 tons of corn residue produced. That's basically carbon added to the soil system. So that's the other bucket, which is the third one related to the chemical practices. There is a lot of studies. I personally didn't do any studies on that, but there's a lot of studies that adding certain chemicals has some detriment effect in the microbial diversity in the soil system, whether bacteria or fungi. One of the drivers in carbon cycling and in nutrient cycling in the soil system, more so than any others, is the fungi, because they live in the root system, what we call it symbiotic relationship between the fungi and the soil system. And then what they do, they cycle these organic compounds like phosphorus into mineral compounds, because the plants, it doesn't absorb any organic compounds. They need it in mineral forms. So these mycorrhizal fungi, it become a kind of conduit between the organic compounds in the soil and mineralize it into usable form by the root system. And that's when you look at our management practices, and some colleagues here may be familiar with that when you look at the fallow system they use. And especially in the West, they leave half of the field ideal, the other half to harvest more moisture, the other half they crop it. So they found them in studies that the fields that cover the field with no crop growing have significant decrease in the microbial communities and phosphorus content, because there's no live root system to feed these microbes to stay alive. So similarly, adding these to the mix, practices and chemicals, we need to be very careful how we manage these systems, because they have detriment effect on the viability of these and biodiversity of these microbial communities. And they are essential to build a healthy soil. I hope that answered the question. It's a long answer to a very good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the detriment on the downside, when you consider the new hybrids do produce a greater amount of biomass, but if the GMO approach involves use of the pesticide and the pesticide has a detriment, the net effect is my question. Does that produce a better outcome, or would it be better to produce half the biomass and not use the pesticide?
I tend to agree with the latter, which is that's critical. When we look at a healthy soil system and diverse microbial community, that's where we need to balance between really it's the quantity and the quality and the resiliency of the system. If you want a resilient system, we need to think twice. You know, the very definition of regenerative agriculture, which is really, there is a paper I wrote and published with Dr. Rital. It's regenerative agriculture aligning science.
You went mute, sir. I can't hear you.
Andy, we went dead.
The professor's on mute.
Can you hear us still, Mahdi? Bob, can you as the...
I can hear you, but he's on mute.
Yeah.
He muted himself.
You can hear now.
There you go. Try it again.
There he goes. Still, there he goes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so when we look at the definition of regenerative agriculture, it's really a semi-closed system to minimize the external input while maximizing or optimizing the output of the system. To do that, that's when you need the diversity in the system, not to compromise the livelihood and the viability of the system by minimizing any external input, these like external chemical input that might compromise the life and the diversity of these microbial communities. How we incorporate these extra biomass into the soil system to feed back these nutrients. When you look at the corn stalks, for example, I'm familiar with, you look significant amount of phosphorus and potassium into these stalks. And especially if you look at the potassium, it's what they call non-ionic compound in the stalks. It leaches right away into the soil system. So leaving these residue, you're going to recharge these nutrients back into the system. Phosphorus, it's always organic compounds, goes through these decomposition process, added back into the soil system. So, Tim, your question is valid and a good one, because that's what we need to rethink how we employ these practices in a smart way, and far more critically to think about, rethink our production system to be more sustainable.
Thank you.
Rusty, I saw your camera just came on. Did you have a question? No? Okay, I can't see people who's muted and who's not, and so I wasn't sure. There was a question John had real quick. You partially touched on my question. He said, in your experience, do traditional soybean or corn producers view carbon credits as a mean to enhance the margin of their existing crops, or do they see carbon credits playing a critical role in moving industrial ag practices away from monocropping?
Oh boy, that's really it's a good question. You know, from my experience in the Midwest, for the last 20 years, you have people in two different camps. There's a lot of conservationists, a lot of farmers who cares about the land, and they are good stewards, and they understand what's need to be done and use regenerative agriculture, and they look into the carbon credit as a way really to enhance the quality of their farms and keep it better than they inherited. And that's the majority of the people who they are look into that, whether into the corn soybean system. They practice no-till, they use cover crops, they use manure, for example. They trying to minimize their external chemical input into their system. There's others who they are really, I would say, not the early adopter of conservation practices. And they are more into the productivity. And that's really based on the, you know, the mixed messages. And I think we are guilty about it as academia and some agencies. We don't get our message get together and have a unified message to make it more, you know, clear that these practices, you know, it's not just, you know, ethically good and environmentally good, but it's economically good. Some of the studies, I'll give you an example, in the corn soybean, and these long-term studies I conducted in Iowa for 20 years. And we did economic analysis on the productivity of these different rotation and different tillage system. So we have 3 crop rotation. We have corn after soybean, corn after corn, and corn soybean. And we have 5 tillage systems across these rotation. And what we found in the initial, that if you continue to do continuous corn, you lose about 17% of your productivity comparing to corn after soybean. And if you continue to do conventional tillage, you lose as an input about $30 per acre just on the input upfront expenses. Some of the farmers, they took this to heart and they adopted some of these management. Some of them still driven by their own thinking. So really, you don't have a one uniform thinking about carbon credit, if you will. Some of them, they think about this is value added to their farms as another additional income. Some of they do it even before the carbon credit, just to improve their farms and improve their operation and sustain their productivity.
Okay, so I obviously lost my connection for a second, so I don't have questions that were in our chat. It deletes them on my end. So if anybody has any specific questions, did that answer your question, John? I assume. Carpenter?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you, John.
Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to address right now? Jackie?
Mandy, if you have a few minutes, there's a few pieces of news around soil carbon might be of interest to the producers in the group.
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
5 minutes on it. Okay. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things happened. In particular, I think it was Monday, might have been Tuesday of the week. The True Terra people announced their 2020 program. That's the Land O'Lakes Regenerative project, we'll call it. And so they're accepting 2022 enrollments, and they have, and it's all around the co-op trying to assist growers to get into this carbon project through a couple different angles of their offer. And so they have 3-year projects, they have 1-year projects, and they're actually really quite flexible. The only thing they kind of set up is if you take money in the offer, then what they will conduct a soil survey on your place and help you with a best guess on carbon for your farm. But they want to be able to pool the data, the soil sample data for your outfit into their larger, True Terra endeavor. I think that has some interesting opportunities, both agronomically and for the carbon thing. And I have a request in to ask what to do about hemp in that. The quick response was, if you have anything in your rotation, corn, beans, wheat, cotton, sorghum, I think are one of the base crops. If you have any of those in your rotation, you should be able to enroll. And then the hemp thing is kind of a special footnote while they sort out the protocol. Another thing that happened is endorsing. A few weeks back, we had a conversation. There's 2 sort of big processes in the carbon enrollment process. One is the modeling process, where you enroll by providing 4 or 5 years or more of legacy information on the fields you're enrolling. And then you make a projection of what you think your farming practice will be. And if that all works out numerology wise, then you can enroll into a modeled project. There are also then other projects that are going to be based purely on a measurement methodology, where they will baseline the farm. You will then disclose a bit of information in your crop rotations just for the planning process of carbon, try to maximize your carbon opportunity. And then there's a performance map. So those are hard done soil surveys. And so Indigo, which is a big player and is what we call a hybrid system, they have both a requirement for modeling and measurement. And so in any case, they made a deal and invested money into a company here in Fort Collins called Soil Metrics that has built a API that fits on the front end, as a front end to this USDA Comet farm model, which is their official national carbon planning tool. Okay, so when USDA has to make an annual report about carbon sequestration in the systems, this model called Comet Model plus the history behind it is the generator for that IPC report. So if you put your farm into this sort of model, you have a really good estimator for all sorts of other things. Anyway, the Soil Metrics got $1 million for the help promote and improve the API. And a lot of that money actually flows into staff work over at Colorado State. And then on this Sunday, Monday was the International Soils Day. And I don't know if any of you noticed this, but man, is there a lot of people out there talking about soil carbon and all the benefits on this. And yeah, the hemp growers here trying to get it into your rotations. That's a quest that a couple of us are working on. So that's some news. There's more stuff happening. I'm happy to share it as I understand it. So back to you, Mandy and Doctor.
Yeah. Just to follow on Neil's comments, which is, I'm glad you mentioned that, Neil. That's good information to share with the group. To look at the carbon monitoring process and look at whether they use field measurements and go and poke holes in the ground, pull soil samples and analyze it and send it to the lab. And that's very expensive. So most of these different platforms, they're trying to minimize that cost because we dealt with the cost. And if you take a soil samples, it costs you probably just for the soil analysis, almost $20 to analyze one sample. And let alone to trip to the field, the equipment use, all these, the manpower to collect these samples. So if you have a large farm to do that and sample it, you have to do what they call grid sampling or some mechanism to go and collect a certain number of samples, 27 samples per acre, for example. So that's is going to be significant investment. So what Neil alluding to, there's another approach which is kind of hybrid between, they use modeling approach, which is a predict, how much carbon you're going to accumulate without visiting the field based on data collected previously, calibrate these models to calculate how much carbon accumulated over time. I think the limitation with any new crop is the establishment of that crop within the main agriculture or production system. And that's what the hemp challenge is going to be. It's how we accelerate that integration of that crop within the cropping system. And to increase that integration is really the effort to look into how we fit it into the production. And the more demand on the crop by the industry, by different uses as a fiber, I think that is going to accelerate the integration. In the meantime, is going to become part of the crop rotation. Traditionally, most of these outfits, whether Indigo or any others, ASMC and True Terra, they're looking in the traditional cropping system, corn, soybean rotation, wheat, these are the familiar crops in the system. But I think there's a lot of room for opportunities, in my opinion, to accelerate that involvement. And platforms like this, what Mahdi is doing and others in accelerating and, having that networking and branding this new crop as part of the agriculture system is critical to this carbon credit. And when we look at the carbon credit, it's a very moving target yet. And there is a lot of work on the national level to set a standard and include these specialty crops into different mechanism within the row cropping system. And that's where the USDA is looking into opportunities to look at what they call it climate smart agriculture practices. So the more involvement, the more I think acceptance for this crop as a critical source of energy and fiber into our agriculture systems, the more become relevant into the carbon credit.
There was a good question, and then Paul, I'll turn it over to you. But real quick question from Nathan: how would you phase them out when they're used? I'm talking about credits, Nathan. I don't know.
Yeah, the double counting of carbon credits is a kind of a legacy headache that has been around now for well, they've been arguing it for quite a while. This occurs when you sell a credit out of the United States and somebody in Europe buys it. So we show a sale of credits, so that's a credit out of our system. And then the European buying it shows a credit on their side.
Right.
The process around that is sort of a next step in the eco-service marketing of these things. Most of the credits right now in agriculture are cash, are counter-to-counter sort of cash transaction. But the big magical feature is once one or more of these players establish what is called a eco-service token, then things will change in terms of how that works. So ultimately, in the registries that are being developed here in ag, when you create a token and then you sell it, the nature of the way it works today is that they're zeroed out. There is, once you expend it, somebody buys it for an offset, that is a done deal. When it goes into the carbon tokens, right now it start acting somewhat in the domain of these coins. Conceptually, it's a token in a larger marketplace. Ethereum is one that's being used. There's another one that's coming forward that's in the gold standard. You're going to hear a lot about this here in the next 2 quarters would be my guess. And the idea is they want to have tokens that will allow freer trade, but once somebody applies it as a credit, then the system, the blockchain system itself, will zero out the deal, right? The original credit is pending until somebody finally applies it against a crediting condition, and then the blockchain cleans that up. I'm still learning on it. It's complex stuff, but these are just right on the edge of being added into the ag services.
I saw some comments too about NFTs and the blockchain and the track and trace and smart contracts as well that we have. I would love to actually advance and have another conversation around that piece of it. I saw Seth Boone, I saw you're on. I don't know if you wanted to add a little comment. I know you're heavily involved in this space also. Are you still available? Are you still on here? Maybe he jumped off. Anyways, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I could, Mandy, there's a lot of interest. The things we're talking about here are soil carbon credits, right? But then Mandy and GHA has another domain of this stuff that's X-farm. Okay, so once the bales of hemp leave the farm, then how they're applied, how their fiber is embodied, right? Whether it goes into hempcrete or gets pumped down a gas well to seal it up, or embodied into the hardboard, the fiber boards and these other materials that have longevities, right? Some certainty of their sequestrations, then you can apply for and try to find these carbon credits. I'm sort of thinking that the green hemp growers, the GHAs, might have a brand that you got is developed that goes on the hemp post X farm gate that is GHA certainty, right? We know what field it came from, the treatment down the track, but that would mean having something like a barcode on the wrapper when it's baled.
It's pretty, yeah.
All right, enough said.
I could follow up on that a little bit. So that's an area that I've been working on similarly, which is track and trace. And being
Right.
able to track where something is established, where it was made, what was actually the embodied lifetime carbon that's part of that. So you're right that it's actually not easy to do. But the thing is the farmer can't get a credit for the biomass that they have produced, as the professor was saying, through the photosynthesis. That biomass actually has carbon in it, but you can't count it as a credit until it's been proven to be sequestered in one of these, as Neil was saying, final products, whether it's hempcrete, whether it's as an oil well sink, or as something else that you can prove is sustainably captured. Because if you're just going to take it and burn it all,
Right.
that's not sequestering your carbon. You're just re-releasing it, recycling it, not actually sequestering it. So I think that'd be one of the real kickers. We'll have more on that coming over probably the next couple of quarters out of Global Smart Commodity Group as well. But I'll hold off on that for now. So thank you very much.
I mean, if I could comment, like we're
There you go,
in this
Seth.
space and seeing the same thing, like everything's consistent from the top. Everything is consistent with what y'all are saying. Like what we're seeing, like the blockchain works really well throughout the supply chain, but it's when it's crossing or going overseas, that carbon credit, that's where it almost needs to be funged at that point.
Right.
And offset 1-to-1 into this other system or into the other clearing system. And I feel like if we could have a block, everyone have their own supply chains, but have a centralized Globex-like platform or clearing system, that might be able to allow these things to be funged without actually compromising the data that's in the NFT.
I think you're onto it, Seth. But the piece that we've missed, right, and has gotten everybody in trouble is the legacy carbon credits that were put together when the first efforts 10 years back. They didn't quite have it all sorted out. And so there's this somewhat, they claim, it's like an avalanche waiting to fall on a marketplace, but they're trying to figure out how to just blow those out and get rid of them, because there's millions on millions of these very low quality, I'm going to call them avoidance kind of carbon credits that weren't thought completely through, or the registries are a bit wonky or wobbly, or, just a whole bunch of legacy, gets started in a business nobody really understands. And now the clarity is coming together because there's a lot of money flowing into this stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to have even more come in. I mean, it's not just the legacy stuff. There's going to be a lot of greenwashing credits, you could call them away. Like there's going to be, like the biggest issue we're seeing is there's not enough supply of carbon credits for the demand that's out there. And there's just a lot of incentive for exactly what you're saying, those legacy credits that aren't exactly 1-to-1 with CO2. There's going to be even more of those come in. And like with the legacy credits, like, yeah, I really just need to, it'd be interesting to see like what data we would have on those legacy credits, like when they were initialized, everything else. But like, it's almost to the point to where you can't use those in a voluntary market, or even in a government market once they adopted that.
Right. So just one other point, since I got you folks, you make a determination, understand there is a difference between removal carbon credits, which we do through cropping systems, and what you heard today about the biology methods, right? And then you have the avoidance carbon credits, and these are they are lesser carbon credits in my mind. They're essentially the concept of I left a petrol car for a battery car. Can I claim avoidance carbon credits? There's many avoidance carbon credits that are being offered, and very rare, truly removal carbon credits being offered. And those that buy, sell, and really know this stuff, they prefer the ecosystem-based carbon credits, removals, because they also have a lot of these strong secondary on-farm benefits in the productivity domain that Dr. Mahdi was visiting you with. Okay, over.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I was going to say, Seth and Mahdi, do you have anything you want to add? And then I'll turn it over to Paul to ask his question.
We actually looked at that exact problem. Like, we think like the bond rating system is going to have to be pseudo implemented into that to basically categorize those credits. But yeah, I'd like to see what Mahdi had to say as well, because that's challenging.
Well, there's a lot of issues related to these really carbon credit and the accurate counting of these carbon credit. You look into the avoidance, as Neil mentioned, also the removal carbon credit, and then the reduction, which is another component. And most of the net zero emission basically right now trying to look into the removal concept rather than the reduction concept, which is that goes back to the industry role in reducing their emission. And that's a big debate right now between, when you look at the fertilizer industry, for example, contributes significant amount to greenhouse gas emission, approximately 20% of the total emission coming from the manufacturing of these different chemicals and fertilizer. So the question is, the removal alone is going to solve the climate challenge or the greenhouse gas emission? The answer, I don't think so, because you need both approaches, which is that you look into the reduction and plus the removal. So that I thought I'd just share these couple of comments with you.
Awesome. Thanks. I think this is a perfect transition, especially around the climate involvement in climate change that you've got. Paul, you want to go ahead and ask your question or make your comments real quick? And hello, welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. I just want to suggest that in the cannabis culture, we need to be talking about terpene credits and oxygen credits before we talk about carbon credits, because first of all, if we sequester the carbon without replenishing the atmospheric aerosol terpenes, the planet will be broiled to extinction under increasing levels of UVB radiation. But the other thing about the terpene credits and the oxygen credits is that they can be applied retroactively, because if you grew hemp last year and there isn't any tracing required, because there isn't the issue of proving that a carbon sink destination for the material was its ultimate outcome. The terpenes and the oxygen go up into the atmosphere and perform environmental services that farmers need to be compensated for. We all breathe oxygen, and we all suffer from increasing UVB radiation, which many people aren't even aware of. But if you check out my book and my film, you can get more insight into why terpene credits need to be elevated above carbon credits, because UVB radiation is increasing and it's killing the planet. So thanks for allowing me to input into the conversation, and I'm available if people want to understand further.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anybody has any comments or anything. Like I said before we got on here, this is not my field of expertise, and so I really lean into you guys that are experts to address the conversation. And so, Mahdi, do you have any comments or anything?
I agree. This is really goes to the policy questions. Is not just about science, how we balance between these different outcomes and different effects. So the policy issues that's out of my domain, and anybody have any insight into the policy issues. That's what we're struggling with, because we have to have a policy to address these different good, really thoughtful insights from Paul and others to how we put a policy, because even when we look about the carbon credit, it's in my opinion, and that's a personal opinion, it's like the gold rush. Everybody trying to claim piece of the market, and that sometimes muddy the water and also dilute the value, even really having a real solutions. And that's what we are kind of in the experimental phase of the carbon credit, to establish some boundaries, to establish some national and global standard for that, because when you look at the greenhouse gas emission, it doesn't know boundaries. Most of the high emitters, they are somewhere. Still, they're using a lot of coal fire plants and contributing to the greenhouse gas more than anybody else. So that's really the issue. It's a national debate, a national standard to establish these standards. So not it's a guessing game, or basically based on the trying to take advantage of the market and establish some economic advantage. And that's why I sometimes maybe a little bit critical of the ag industry, becoming, champion of some of them, of the climate change and save the planet, because there's economic opportunity. Let's be frank about it. So that's where the national policy and the global policy is critical to establish these boundaries, and how you count for the thoughts Paul and others have brought to the table. These are legitimate issues.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're at an hour right now. I'm happy to open up if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to chime in on, but I want to be respectful of your time, Mahdi, and everybody else's. Does anybody else have any burning questions that they'd like to jump in real quick? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you do. If not, then we'll sign off. We have another meeting on Thursday that is
Mandy.
Yes.
I'm gonna interrupt you for a minute here.
Yeah, please, Jackie.
Because I have a really practical question.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Okay, so we've got the corn crop rotation. I live in the Midwest. Corn soybean rotation all the time. So a farmer adds weeks or hemp, and now he has to have more machinery. How do we convince him to buy that extra piece of equipment? That's my question.
Well, since I've got a background in this part, you have to do a business plan. You're not going to do it if it doesn't make money, and if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So a lot of things will use the same drill, and a lot of things won't. Canola and wheat will use the same drill.
I think too, that's where we're seeing, definitely a modification to equipment, not the exact same, but a lot of the equipment has been able to be modified. I've even seen in the sickle bars just protecting so that the hemp doesn't get, bound up, which you wouldn't normally have to do on other crops. But does anybody else have anything on here that I know Russ?
Yeah, Jackie, one of the ways that that could be solved is through farm services, right? A grower wants to grow hemp and invest in the crop, but uses third parties for any specialized equipment that he may not have. Most of the seed drills and row planters probably can handle hemp just fine. There's some knowledge to be learned there, but the harvesting side may in fact be specialized enough that you can go and have somebody roll up your hemp or harvest it. So Services can do it while you're waiting. You know, if you can make enough money using services, you can possibly make enough money by buying into the hard equipment. Over.
Joseph? Hello, sir.
Yeah,
That's awesome, Mel.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I'd like to chime in kind of from a farmer's perspective.
Please.
And that, you know, first of all, I want to second everything that the professor and everybody else has talked about. You know, from a boots on the ground perspective, I've witnessed almost everything. You know, the more I till, the worse off my soil, the more diversity I have, the better off my soil health. The list goes on and on. And I think from a grower's perspective, and what we need to broadcast out there is not to chase the dollar through carbon sequestration programs or farm services agency programs, but rather show the profitability that the farmers can experience by implementing some of these things. And the profitability happens very soon. It's not as long-term of a proposition as most think. Some of my results within one season, soil health improvement was massive. So to also tie into farmers purchasing specialized equipment, yeah, there's some specialized equipment, but I think as soon as growers start seeing the profitability that's coming along with diversifying their, not only their crop rotations, but their getting away from monocultures in the individual cropping systems, always having more than one thing growing at any given time. I think the profitability will come there and farmers will naturally look towards a way to interject more crops, and hemp will become one of them.
I like it. There was a great question. Maybe you can speak to this. I think I know the answer, but what about farmers that don't have infrastructure to manufacture biomass? How do we get the credits for regenerative agriculture and carbon?
That I don't know. And so my take on that so far to this point is I'm just going to do it anyway, because that's what's good for the environment. That's what's good for the industry and good for it's good for my pocketbook. We've done our own small scale processing here to try to circumnavigate that and also just try to keep the scale small. But also on the processing end, some of the end users don't really know what they need yet. So it's hard to shoot for something that, you know, people who are in the development of product A, hey, they're working on developing product A, but they don't know yet what product A exactly needs yet. So it's just going to take some time to keep fine tuning.
Awesome. Thank you very much for chiming in. I love hearing from farmers, especially on these points. And I think that they're missed so often. So your voice is very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to add real quick? Perky, I saw your camera come on. I don't know if you've got anything you want to add. And Seth, is there anything else you want to chime in on before we sign off?
Nope. Joe said pretty much he said it better than I could. So yeah.
Awesome.
I have a question, Andy.
Sure.
Hey, how are you? So my question is, good. We have a clear connection?
You're good.
Perfect. So I'm off the Gulf Coast. My background's real estate development. I see a lot of people in the area. They're wanting to utilize these products. Okay. So I'm basically trying to do this introduction for these different building products to our developers or architects here in the area, as well as, you know, small builders. That's one side of it. On the other side, I do industrial marine cells. So I'm dealing a lot with the petro refining industries, the natural, the LNG plants that are coming up. And I've got people contacting me about hemp, or you said biomass. This whole world's new to me, so I'm just learning all the lingo, so forgive me. But they're looking for biomass. They're curious about carbon credits. I mean, I've talked to some major purchasing agents with like Total, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil's, and they're interested in this. So to get this conversation put together with you that are very knowledgeable in this is a must for Texas and Louisiana, which is my home. that is a big concern for me, because on all the other states, you have all this going on, but here in Texas, everything's we're starting out. It's new. People are very unsure. I have some large tracts of land. They say processing facilities. Well, they don't even really know what it takes to have a processing facility and what that entails. Is that the best right for their property or not? I don't know.
Well, I think that's where our goal in creating through Global Hemp Association or these networking meetings is to touch on all of these topics, right? So, just like the carbon topic, we've got a processing topic, we've got seeds, we've got genetics, we've got 400 hours published of different interviews. And so I would then turn this back to you guys. If you have specific topics or interest from people that are looking for specific information, let me know, and we can either invite additional, academic or professors, people that are in the industry, out of the industry, that can help to address these questions and bring this forward, right? And then as far as Texas, there are a few groups in Texas that are doing some things and doing great things that I'm happy to connect you for. And then anybody else on here. But yeah, I'd love to see where we can potentially, facilitate some of those conversations, or if you have people that you want, to learn certain things, that we could definitely help facilitate that. And then just knowing that, this is one piece of the education. As we develop this, there are going to be, opportunities to connect face-to-face and connect through communities or on-farm projects. And so just understand that, as we develop this, there are phases to rolling out content and information and data that's being collected, not just from GHA, but the partners that we're collaborating with. So anything else, Mahdi? Yeah, absolutely. Mahdi, that you would like to add before we close up?
No, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. It's a great discussion, exchange of ideas, and I agree with a lot of the thoughts Joe just mentioned, which is really critical to for farmers. And I work all my career with farmers closely. It's to look into the major issue. We are not going to solve the climate issues, by agriculture alone. But I think the major task, in my opinion, for agriculture to sustain the system, sustain the productivity, and improve soil resiliency, that's first and foremost. Other things will come along as additional benefits. So I think that's, in my opinion, the major emphasis. Once we have a resilient system to improve the productivity and any other crop in the mix, it's going to be adding value to the farm system at large. And thanks again for having me on.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. Like I said, we've got another education meeting on Thursday at 2:00. You can find it on our hemp hallway. Also, we are doing, I'm going to put this out there, we're doing a membership push. We've got some big projects that GHA is engaging in for data collection and research for the industry. And so we really appreciate the memberships and the support. Also, just to make sure you guys stay connected and get involved on the hemp hallway so that you guys can, find where people are, make additional connections, move business along. Okay, other than that, thank you guys very, very much. And Mahdi will be in touch.
Thank you.
For your input and everybody else's input.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Joe, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Thank you, guys. Klosh, you're upside down.
Another awesome podcast. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Perky.
Stay blessed, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work. Much appreciated.